And welcome back to Durban, and the weather positively showing off, the sun beaming down. It's an absolutely splendid background that we have for this broadcast this morning. And of course, the Minister of Transport, Dr. Blade Nzimande, now he has convened a series of sector dialogues across the transport sector. And we are here today for the inaugural Maritime Transport Sector Dialogue. And that's taking place today and tomorrow at the Southern Sun Elangeni Hotel here in Durban. But we, of course, chose the splendid setting for the conversations that we are having this morning at the Durban Harbour. And we are now going to have a bit of a panel discussion, and joining us for the discussion to represent some of the industries at play here and talk through some of the challenges. I have on the panel here with me, to my immediate left is Ms. Khomotso Selokane, and she is from the South African Maritime Business Forum. Thanks so much for coming through. And next to her is Mr. Mthunzi Madia, Chief Director for Maritime Infrastructure and Industry Development in the Department of Transport. To his left is Mr. Chris Makakula, who's from Wabona Bulk Terminals, and Ipeleng Selele on the extreme left there. She is a representative of Women in Maritime Africa. So this is the panel, and let's kick it off by looking at what is going on in the sector. So one of the things, Khomotso, that Minister Nzimande was talking about was the slow pace of transformation. Now, speaking at least for some of the owners in this particular industry, the maritime industry, the South African part of the ownership, perhaps you could start by giving us a breakdown as to who owns what in this sector.
Thank you, Sakina. What we found when we actually went through the research of who owns businesses within our shores, as well as what we deem to be the 10th province, is majority foreign-owned businesses. The reason that we started the South African Maritime Business Forum last year in October was purely to have a voice and a custodian to try and redress that issue. If we are South Africans, we need to be able to speak on behalf of our shores. We need to be able to be speaking on behalf of what comes in and what comes out in terms of the shipping and all the other sort of maritime industry sector operations.
So with regard to the South African business ownership, are you able to give us a demographic breakdown in that regard?
The demographic breakdown, if you're talking about South African businesses, is so if you look at it, almost 90% as a whole would be foreign owned. Of the 10% that is currently there, 90% or 95% of that 10% is white owned and not necessarily transformed at all. The idea is to focus on looking at the transformation regime and the charters that are going through and saying, how do we enforce transformation, or how do we then guide transformation to make sure that the majority of this economy participate in the maritime economy?
Mr. Madia, if we come to you, what needs to happen in order to try and advance the transformation imperative within the maritime sector?
Thanks, Sakina. Look, maybe I should start by putting a broader picture of the maritime sector. As a country, we have 9 commercial ports, starting from Northern Cape, Port Nolloth, up to the port of Richards Bay. All these ports are governed by the National Ports Act, and the Department of Transport is a custodian of that act. In 2017, the comprehensive transport maritime policy was approved by cabinet, which becomes the backbone of what needs to happen in this country, especially when you touch on transformation. We have developed a strategy that is still going the approval stages within the department, which now outlines exactly what needs to happen, when, and who's responsible for what. I think the issue that we had before, and then the sector that was complaining about, is that as a country we didn't have a policy. So when you talk about investment and attracting investors into the port space or maritime space, we didn't have a policy that is going to back up those initiatives. Now, as a country, we've got a policy, we've got a strategy, and then we are trying to break it down so that we can be able to achieve what we need to achieve as a country. There are specific deliverables that are hanging fruits that we can tap on from. For example, the issue of coastal shipping. I think we are very clear as a country that what is it that must happen within the coastal shipping. Coastal shipping, Sakina, that's when we move cargo within the borders of South Africa. All over the world, the country protects that space for local people. So I don't think there's a reason why we shouldn't do that as South Africa, to make sure that we protect the space so that South African can be able to buy ships and being able to trade within our coastline. We can then start to look at what we do in terms of going to open seas as a country in terms of exports when we attract black people in particular.
But what are some of the concrete targets that you're looking at as the department? Because we have over 3,000 kilometers of coastal land in South Africa. So what are some of the targets that you've set?
Like I said earlier on, Sakina, there are low-hanging fruits. First of all, we want to target the coastal shipping. Secondly, we've got a policy that talks to the ship registry, meaning we want vessels to be registered in South Africa, because there is a knock-on effect when you do that. Immediately, there are taxes that the country can earn. Secondly, we are able to determine the people that are working on those ships as a country, because those particular vessels will then be flying South African flag. I think those are two critical issues that we are looking at as a country when it comes to transformation.
Mr. Makakula, if I can move over to you, bulk terminals, what exactly do you do?
Well, thanks, Sakina. Bulk terminals, you'll understand we are into a space of dry bulk and liquid bulk. What is dry bulk? Dry bulk encompasses anything which is a mineral but which is dry. In particular, coal, magnetite, chrome ore, I can name them. South Africa's got about 49 types of minerals which we export using the ocean economy. Then liquid bulk, then that's where you come into the crude and so forth. We've got oil, you've got a refinery here at the port, and that is what you call the liquid bulk. So liquid bulk the terminals is having two types of bulk. I'm not talking about the containers. Containers is another aspect, but in our space we are handling anything which comes in and going out, which is liquid or dry bulk. But if I can just extend a bit, Sakina, about the maritime industry, the opportunities which the Department of Transport and the Transnet Post Authority are trying to open space for the small businesses. Let me unpack a number of opportunities. Let's assume a ship is like an island. It's a moving island. Inside that island, there are people which have got needs and wants and so forth. So to service those people when they call here, you need chandlers. Chandlers, they supply food, they supply equipment and supply this. That is one aspect of business opportunity. There is various types of opportunities where people can tap in and zoom in into it. Ships agency, like in our case, we are doing ships agency, we are doing also clearing and forwarding of all types of goods in and coming out, including the containers. But also, there are a lot of opportunities as well as there are barriers.
We'll talk about those barriers in just a moment, because I want to bring in at this point Ipeleng Silele. And Ipeleng, you represent women in this particular sector. And one of the transformation imperatives, one would think, would speak to the inclusion of women. But there are many other areas where we're also lagging behind, but the participation of women in particular, how would you characterize the level of representation of women at this stage?
I think it's very minimal, and hence we decided to form Women in Maritime Africa. And our purpose is just very clear and straightforward. It is really to mainstream women in the maritime economy, to develop them and to integrate them in the different parts or aspects of the value chain of the maritime sector. And we actually had to make sure that to have a collective voice, I mean, we recognize that to have a collective voice, you've got to be organized to start with. And organized from a substance perspective, where we're actually being appointed or given opportunities on merit, not necessarily because we are women. So if you look at how WIMA is structured, we have maritime lawyers, we have freight forwarders, we have captains like Captain Hannah in Ghana, one of the first few captains in the industry. We have seafarers, we have maritime administrators, and we also have a lot of our women who are actually managers at the ports across the continent. And of course, I mean, in South Africa, if you look at most of our ports, they're managed by women. So all we're saying is we've never been as ready as we are now, because I think we also are grateful that we have a framework as a country, which is Operations Phakisa. And the role of it is simply to unlock the investment opportunities and looking at women participating in these investment opportunities, but ultimately addressing our socio-economic imperatives. Because if you look at some of the projects, and I'm going to be very specific because we are really about maritime economy. If you look at most of the projects that are going around, I mean, storage tank facilities, concession agreements, and if you were to go and ask the organizations that are obviously awarding the concession agreements and looking at storage tank facilities, there aren't women. I'm yet to see a woman coming out and saying, even from a petrochemical perspective, because I'm an LPG specialist in the energy, on the energy side. So when will I actually own my own storage tank facilities where I don't have to be renting space from someone else's storage tank facilities, because I'm able to distribute my LPG gas? And this LPG gas obviously is a social product that enables women to be able to cook, to be able to use it for heating at home, and these are breadwinners. So from our end, we took an industry-led initiative where we started coming up with our own projects that are obviously in line with the country's vision. And I mean, you probably might have heard the President's State of the Nation's address articulating or rather highlighting the importance of the oceans economy. So I think from my perspective, well, we are grateful that we are where we are now. And I think we're also excited and enthusiastic about the future. And because we're structured and we're crystal clear about how we would like to get involved, that's why then we've started engaging with different stakeholders.
Right, just going to give it a few seconds for this particular tugboat passing behind us to just get through. And of course, as they pass, we want to come back to, the discussion here and looking at not just the transformation agenda as it pertains to women or opportunities, especially financial, but also the rural-urban divide, because I think it was Mr. Makakula who said earlier, very often when we think of these opportunities, we tend to focus on the urban settings, the ports here in Durban, but the coastline runs for over 3,000 kilometers in this country. So just in terms of that, what are some of the opportunities that are available, Khomotso, to some of the people who might be watching this and thinking, what, maybe there's something here, maybe this is something I can get involved in?
If you look at the rural or the coastal line, that's specifically rural, I think rural and underdeveloped areas is something that we've always wanted to focus on. It speaks to most of us come from that space. There are initiatives that have been put out there. I know the fact that Contralesa is one of the entities that are very interested in coming on board. The background that we have, not necessarily from a maritime perspective, has also been in what Ipeleng was mentioning around energy. In the energy sector, there's a lot of opportunities that have been put there. So we talk about the fact that we need these storage facilities. We need access to opportunities that then also harness or speak to the rural people. The same opportunities that if you're talking about LPG, how do they then access it? But besides that, we have aquaculture, we have fishing, we have people that actually use this to I mean, there was a story I heard this week that one of the coastal villages just off Coffee Bay, people wake up in the morning and they jump into the ocean and they pick their own fish and they pick their own mussels and clams and they sell it. The idea is to create that access for them to say, if this is what you're doing on a daily basis, why don't we as an association in collaboration with government say, let's then give you access to these markets. These markets are there. It's just the idea of people not being able to access them or knowing what is out there.
It's the question of access, but it's also the question of funding to get into that. And the fact that I've never heard anybody say, you know what, I'm going to go into anything in the maritime industry. I've never heard anyone say that. So there is a great lack of awareness of the opportunities that exist within this particular sector. But as government, what sort of opportunities are you able to offer at this stage for people who may want to enter the space, who don't have the money, who don't have the knowledge, skill or know-how? What can you offer as government, Mr. Madia?
Sakina, the barrier of entry in this sector is huge. You need a couple of millions, if it's not billions, to start operation within the maritime sector, particularly at the port level. We started a Operation Pakisa project in 2014, and we set ourselves certain targets in terms of funding, in terms of job opportunities, etc., etc. Up until now, within the marine transport and manufacturing sector, which the Department of Transport is responsible for, we have invested, I'm talking about the sector, private sector as well as government, about 8 billion rand thus far. But we are very still low in terms of the target that we have set ourselves.
But what sort of return on investment have you had for that 8 billion rand investment?
Look, because we are responsible for the infrastructure-based activities, we are still putting infrastructure. Once the infrastructure is there, ship repair facilities, buying of cranes, developing dedicated beds for oil and gas sector. If you look at the recently fined by the Total, then we need to unpack that and see what is it that on the value chain that we can benefit from as a country. So department like DTI have come forward in terms of tax incentives, especially on the manufacturing side. One of the decisions that we took when we were developing Ocean's economy was to say, when it comes to marine manufacturing, it means especially manufacturing of boats, etc., etc. We said the minimum local content must be 60%. And that regulation has been implemented. So if any of government entities, for example, they want to build patrol vessels, tugs, etc., etc., they must make sure that 60% minimum of local content is implemented. And then we are very serious about that to make sure that we open up the sector for South Africans in particular.
Well, unfortunately, our time here on Morning Live is just about up, but I want to give each of you like 15 seconds. Literally, I'm timing you. Just to give us a parting shot in terms of your perspective that you will be taking to this inaugural dialogue. What is it that you would like to highlight, Mr. Makakula?
Our frustration within, as a private sector, is in two folds. One is the legislation. You can follow the processes of the government in terms of tendering and so forth, but it takes years for them to come to a decision. By that time, maybe your funders would have just got fed up and just leave you alone. And it's a serious concern.
So you need greater ease of access.
Ease access and quick decision.
Okay. And then to you, Ipeleng?
I think for us it's really also about acceleration. Obviously, the nation at large, we're restless. And our generation as well is restless. So I think we are really looking at how quickly can we mainstream women in the economy. And most importantly, the human capacity building aspect is critical because we have infrastructure, we have training academies, some of them are idling. So I'm saying, how can we find a way of collaborating and look at a PPP model? Particularly from a human capacity building, because you really can't be a great business person if you've got no substance. So if we could at least try and attend to certain things as a short term, and we split at least our milestones into short term, medium and long term. So in the short term, acceleration, and most importantly, human capacity building, if we can train, mentor and coach women. But we have started, as I said, we've been very proactive.
Well, as you heard, there are many challenges, there are many barriers to entry within the maritime sector. But of course, this inaugural summit will look at many of those and also try to find solutions. And at the end, there will be a declaration which one hopes would contain some of the issues highlighted, like time frames, for example, ease of access, policy that speaks to all of these imperatives as well. And this will be happening over 2 days, today and tomorrow, right here here in Durban. But from us here at the Durban Harbour, have yourself a day as fantastic as the weather.